This is my 47th video on my work with OO gauge. See part 1 of this series for my reasons for getting into OO gauge when I already had a lot invested in working in N gauge, and I didn't really have space available for a large, fully operational OO gauge layout. Also see my lengthy series on my N gauge railway modelling for smaller and more complex scenery and smaller scale trains running. This part is the 21st, dealing with my third layout made using mainly Hornby EZ Track. See the prior video, part 27, for my reasons for wanting to try a Hornby EZ Track layout when I already had an OO gauge layout using Bachmann EZ Track. This part covers my build of the Dapol, formerly Airfix, plastic country inn kit C25. This is the kit as I bought it. Plastic parts in a bag stapled to a paper sheet. Here are the parts unpacked. I've been building plastic kits for 60 years. I did my first one with my dad's help. Well, he really did most of it on my 8th birthday, and I'll be 69 on my birthday this year. And in all those years, I think this is the worst cast plastic kit I've ever come across. Not that the moulds were originally bad. If you could get an old Airfix version, it would probably be fine, but this was originally released by Airfix 50 years or more ago, and apparently the moulds were in awful shape by the time this example was cast, as the amount of flash was dreadful, and there were also holes and bad casting marks with many of the parts. So my first job was to spend an hour or two just trying to clean up the parts to the point where they might be ready for assembly. The instructions consisted entirely of simple diagrams with no verbal instructions whatsoever. Nothing came with the kit beyond the grey plastic parts and the single instruction sheet. No decals, no printed signs, no glazing parts. I did want to glaze the windows, so I cut out glazing parts for all of the many windows from clear acetate that I had on hand. I simply placed the window parts onto the edge of the acetate, drew round with a marker, and cut out the piece. I cut out my glazing parts at the start because I needed to have the plastic window frames free to get the sizes, but I didn't want to attach the glazing parts until later after I'd done some spray painting, so I put all of my glazing parts into a Ziploc bag and set them aside for the time being. Having got all of the glazing parts made, I went ahead and glued the window frames into their respective holes on the walls. The frames fitted into the holes from the inside. The window frames were amongst the worst cast parts, and even after all my cutting and sanding they were still rather uneven, but I didn't think that would matter too much. The two chimneys were each assembled from 3 parts, 2 L-shaped parts that went together to form the stack and then a cap. It was quite tricky cleaning up the parts for the stacks so that they would join neatly. The caps were better cast than most of the parts and fitted on without trouble. I glued the 4 wall assemblies together to make the main frame of the building. I made a mistake, but we'll come back to that later. I tried the roof in place, although I didn't want to glue it at this point. The roof was better cast than most of the small parts so far as flash and casting marks were concerned, but it was quite badly warped and didn't sit down well on top of the walls. This is part of the problem, I guess, of just selling these things in plastic bags. It doesn't treat the parts too kindly over time, and then over shipping. I used some putty to fill in gaps on the corners of the walls. I masked the inside of the building as I wanted to spray paint the outside, but I didn't want the overspray to get onto the inside, as that would make later work with the glazing more difficult. I sprayed the whole outside of the main building white, and I sprayed the roof grey, although the part was already grey and I nearly didn't bother to paint it, but I did. Now I masked all of the outside walls except for the bottom sections that were supposed to be brick. I put a black wash onto the roof to bring out the relief of the slates. I spray painted the masked walls and the chimneys with a brick red colour. Here are the walls with the masking removed. I started to colour the beams black, a fiddly and quite extensive job. To be honest, I bought this kit without realising that the building was half timbered. If I'd known that I'd have to do all of these beams, I might have given the kit a miss. I actually used a permanent marker rather than a brush and paint to do the beams on this building. At this point, I realised my mistake in assembling the walls. I had put one of the end walls on upside down with its brick section at the top rather than at the bottom. Then when I masked for the painting, I thought there was no brick section on this wall. You can't put the front and back walls on upside down, obviously, because they've got gables and doors, but the end walls are just basically square and they'll go on either way up, and I didn't realise I'd put this one on the wrong way up. When I realised what I'd done, I detached this wall, which took much prying along the seams with a sharp knife. Then I masked the detached wall in order to be able to spray its brick section. Meanwhile, whilst the detached wall was drying, I continued work on the beams. Where I got some noticeable black where it shouldn't be, I painted over with white enamel. Here's the detached wall back from spraying. And here it is with the masking removed. And now with my best effort to do the beams and windowsills completed. Then I glued the detached wall back in place the right way up this time. A bit awkward to do. Had to clean off my putty for one thing, and even then I couldn't get an entirely neat join. I put a grey wash over the brick sections in hopes this would approximate them to something more realistic looking. I painted the downpipes with Tamiya gunmetal paint. Now I turned to glazing all of the windows. This involved putting some poly cement above and below a window and then very carefully putting one of my glazing pieces into position with tweezers. It did help that the window frames were cast with sills on their inside bottom edges. This meant that I could sort of rest the glazing piece on the sill, angled inwards, and then drop it down onto the window and press it into place over the glue. Poly cement will glue acetate to styrene quite successfully, I have found. All of my glazing pieces are in place here, though they're not that easy to see in the picture. Here's another view after the glazing. It's actually easier to see the glazing pieces on the back wall. I put the chimneys into their holes in the roof, a straightforward fit. I finished off the painting of the downpipes, couldn't really paint them all in one go, as then there'd be no way to support them to dry without them sticking to something. I put a first coat of a basic wood colour onto the front and back doors. I printed a new sheet of paper curtain pieces from my PC. I think these started life as a scan from a Metcalfe N-gauge kit. The curtains all need to be carefully cut out. The middle piece between the coloured sections in each pair needs to be separated and discarded. Then the curtains are glued to the sides of all the windows. The white tab on the side of the curtain is glued beside the window with the coloured part showing in the window. Obviously it's necessary to check the appearance from the outside to make sure it's okay. This was a delicate tweezer job and took quite a while given how many windows this building has. Since here I was gluing paper to plastic, I used rocket card glue for this. I dry brushed some dark brown over the doors to try to give a wood grain effect, a bit tricky to do with parts this small. The front door got its own glazing piece as it has a window in it. And then I picked out the details on the outside of the doors. The front doorstep was glued in place. And the back doorstep, and you can see the curtains better here. Then the front door was fitted, and the back door. The roof was very difficult to get on. Because of the warping of the roof part, it just wouldn't sit down on the walls. I finally resorted to using cyanoacrylate superglue, as this could provide a stronger grip in a shorter time, because I held it down for a long time and then let go with the poly cement and it still came apart. I also glued the downpipes in place at this point. There's one here at the right end of the side wall. The kit came with a signboard part, a plastic part for the signboard, but nothing in the way of a sign to put on it. I hunted around for suitable British inn signs and came up with 4 possible candidates, which I sized appropriately and printed from my PC. I decided to go with the Plough Hotel sign, as this building is apparently more a hotel than a pub. Also, the Plough sign was fairly square, so it fitted well on the board. Well, originally it had a brewery name at the top, which I had cut off from the image when I printed it. I coloured the sides of the sign and the hanging supports. And here's my attempt with this kit, basically finished. The join in the brick where I reattached the side wall is a bit ugly, but I left it, as it would have been pretty tricky to repair, and it doesn't look too awful. Here's the angle from the other side. The front doors come out of alignment a bit. I fixed that afterwards. I think I can live with this, and if I fiddle much more with it I might well make it worse. Here it is on the layout where it was always intended to go, next to the Metcalfe shop and cafe on one side and the super quick railway hotel round the corner on the other side. This village of mine is perhaps a bit oversupplied with hostelries and accommodation. Here's the view looking from across the road. And here from along the road. The building turned out to be just a bit smaller than the paper template I'd made for it. Well, I was guessing with the template really, as I couldn't find published dimensions. And here's an overview of the centre of the layout after this latest edition. The only paper templates remaining now are the one for the second signal box in the foreground and the large one for the super quick school on the far side. I guess I'll probably do the school next, as that template really sticks out now.